Welcome to the Rescue One podcast. Each week, we talk about challenging the way we do business in the fire service when it comes to mental and physical health. I believe there's a better way to do it, and I want to bring in experts that can teach us exactly how and why we should be doing things differently for the sake of our longevity on and off the job. If we can just rescue one of our brother or sister firefighters from preventable injury, illness, or disability, then we've done our job. Thanks for listening. I would love to, kind of get a lot of insight for firefighters, but also other first responders and shift workers. And I've been following your stuff for a while. Super helpful for me personally. I know a lot of our guys and girls out there could really use it, but also it's just so much info out there, and I don't think people know where to start. And I think you have a really good way of trying to just like cut to the important stuff, and it's really refreshing. So, yeah, really excited to have you on. So thank you a million times over. This is great.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I'm so happy to hear that. And I actually have some plans coming of ways to even further support just having an easy way, kind of like a paint by numbers for people to just get in this conversation, no matter where they might be at. Because it's like my mission on the planet to help support people in getting back in the driver's seat with their sleep instead of having, right, that sense of like being mystified or where do I begin? Or I guess I'm just a bad sleeper, or however we might, kind of summarize our troubles with our sleep, that it doesn't have to be that way. So I'm so happy to hear that. And yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
So I had been looking at a couple of your posts, and it looks like you're doing some stuff with first responders, which I want to get into, or like some sleep stuff that I'm really excited about. But before that, I kind of wanted to have you kind of introduce yourself and tell everybody about how you got started, because I think that's pretty cool. And then a little bit about where you went from there, like why sleep, what got you, and I would say this as a compliment, so obsessed with sleep, because so am I. This is gonna be a difficult podcast for me, because to keep this to a brief amount of time where it's like listenable will be hard. I could talk all day about this stuff, and I can ask question after question, but we'll try to just keep it I guess punchy for people. So yeah, how'd you get started?
Oh, well, I'm glad to have a fellow sleep connoisseur, if you will, or
Trying to be, I guess.
appreciator. Yeah, that's fantastic. And so my obsession with sleep really came from my own breakdown with my sleep. And now I really think of my life in a 3-part series of before my full-on like sleep breakdown, during that period, which was a real struggle, and then thereafter. So what it looked like before I went through that struggle was simply a lot of labels and narratives around my sleep, where I would say things like, I'm a short sleeper, I'm a night owl, it's in my genes, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead, what's the problem, what's the big deal, oh, if I go to bed late, I'll just wake up later because, oh, I'm an entrepreneur who it's not a problem. And it was all within this domain of, it's kind of fixed, and that's how it is for me. And it's just an element of like surviving that lot in life. Nothing really to look at, think about too much, was how I was relating to it. And it wasn't until, I started having all of these real signs that I was missing along the way, that how I was managing my sleep, and by extension, my health and well-being, was not working. For instance, I was getting the beginnings of an ulcer, shingles in my 20s, more and more anxious, just kind of brain fog, all the things that are just beginning to show that this was not a workable path, but I wasn't connecting the dots. And it wasn't until it became a must, it really, just got in the, became a, big red siren of, I need to address this, when I went through this period of insomnia, which I had never experienced in my life. And it came, of course, as many of these things, it didn't come out of a vacuum. It was progressive, amplified stress. I was a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends, lots of ventures. And and finally the stress of all that, I reached this rock bottom of just this period of time where I could not, it felt as if I could not sleep night after night after night. And it got to the point where the sun would be setting and my heart would start racing of, oh my God, I can't, greet another night with no sleep and feel like I'm really losing my mind, which was really what was happening because it was so panicky, so fearful that this was like a new reality for me. And when I went to the doctors in actually Croatia, I was traveling at the time and went in with Google
Of all
Translate.
places.
Yeah, I know. Of all places, it's a little, hole in the wall spot. And I leave with sleeping pills. And in this moment of coming from also a family with a lot of pharmaceutical use and dependency, and seeing what that kind of brought for them, this was very a fearful moment for me of, oh my gosh, is this like the moment? Because there's so many mental health issues in my family. And
Mm.
so I was afraid that there was like this breakdown situation that I'm going to now be dependent on pharmaceuticals to be able to sleep. And so it really lit a fire under me to figure this out. And this quest absolutely changed my life. So I went down the rabbit hole, spent a lot of time, energy, effort, money, all the things. A lot of things didn't work, but then over time began to discover this world of chronobiology, which is really the science of time and how time affects our biology.
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating to me and so life changing that as I started to restore my sleep, which I shared wasn't even that great before, now not only getting back to that, but actually now getting to this whole new world to play in of optimal sleep, which I, didn't think was even on the table for me. I didn't think that was possible.
Right.
And so when I started to actually experience that and feel good when I'd wake up, it was just mind blowing. And so I couldn't stop talking about it. And then organically, what ended up getting created was these, small groups. And it emerged into online courses, newsletter, podcast, and just this whole community that came out of really one of the darkest periods of my life. So now my mission on the planet is to support people in their journey, wherever they might be, whether they're just kind of like to sleep a little bit better or they're really, really struggling or anywhere in between, that it is a skill. I believe that wholeheartedly that we can train for this thing, that we do a third of our lives on average, 26 years of our lives spent sleeping. And yet many of us don't really think that much about it. So the fact that you're already doing that and creating a forum for that is fantastic. So grateful to be here and to be able to share as much as I can.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think it's not just a topic of like people wanting more of it, especially in the first responder community, but it's more of, I think we're starting to understand how dangerous it is for us over time.
Yeah.
And the hard part is, you said a couple of things that I think are really relevant is like the labels and narratives that come around it. Man, can we relate? Like the sleep when I'm dead thing. We feel like this is an impossible task to achieve, or like a wall that we can't climb over because we signed up for this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And one thing that I'm having a hard time fighting is that narrative and those labels, because if I try to talk to other firefighters, and I get this really often, if I try to talk to other firefighters about optimizing their sleep off shift, they get the impression that I'm trying to like almost come off as weak and saying like, hey, like if it's almost like if you can't hack it, quit, and I'm like, I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying, if we can't help what we're doing on shift, how about when we're off shift, if we can get better? Because I think like there's some low hanging fruit that are not taken advantage of that I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
And it's a really unique problem because like the company that you started, Sleep is a Skill, which I bought my Swanwick night my blue light blockers from there. I love them. Pretty awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
So happy.
Yeah, I've referred a bunch of people. Absolutely love them. I had some other ones before, didn't do anything. They were clear, and I was Googling around and saw your stuff. And anyway, so
it's great.
But with the low hanging fruit and the way the firefighters kind of treat themselves off duty, I know I want to talk about that because I know you are starting to do some stuff with the first responder or military community. And can you talk a little about that project that you're doing? Because I think it's really relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few initiatives that we're really looking to take a stand for. My part of my bread and butter of the people that I work with day in day out are ironically high stakes poker players that we might not think have as much of a connection, but it turns out they have a big connection
Yeah.
because they are essentially shift workers in a lot of regards with
Yeah.
high stress from a perspective of a lot of tilt that they might be dealing with at the table. So they might be up against, millions up or down. So I'm working with them day in, day out, and then applying the things that we know of what they're struggling with to other communities. So we're working with a nonprofit that is looking to help support veterans and first responders. We just had on the podcast recently, and this would be one of the first resources that I would offer for people, is the creators of originally the app called Time Shifter. And I highly suggest that for anyone that's going to be traveling internationally or jumping around in different time zones. But they also just created a new app from the same creators, and it's the shift work app. And this one is so helpful for people, or it has the opportunity to be really helpful because they're using the same algorithm that NASA uses to keep their astronauts on time. And they take that very seriously. While astronauts are shuttling through space, the sun is rising and setting every 90 minutes while that's occurring. So it can be very disruptive and confusing and upsetting. So they do everything possible to maintain a 24-hour rhythm for those individuals. So we take that same algorithm and apply it to shift work. So what you can do is then just drop in your shift and your upcoming shifts, and then it will help share how you can engage in shift work. Like, so it'd be a time shifter as a verb, so that you're taking that on before your shift even begins, during your shift, and thereafter. And particularly valuable for the often dreaded rotating shift schedule.
Hmm.
Or for, people that just can't really predict some of what they might be dealing with. I know certainly for first responders and firefighters, there might be some of those challenges where there's some things that are just popping right up. So how can we even begin to learn what that would look like? What are the things that we can do to prepare in advance where possible? But then if something comes up and now we're just dealing with emergencies, then how can we really train and get ourselves back onto as much of a strength and circadian rhythm as possible? So those are some, resources right off the bat and things that are available to people based on, one of the most important aspects of our society are people that are up against what can be really, really challenging for their health and well-being, which is that shift work or variable schedules.
Yeah, I think technology is going to have some solutions for us. I think one of the things that guys and girls worry about is, do we have enough time? And I'm like a total Matt Walker fanboy. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's really hard for us. So like we go, by the way, on a side note, this is a podcast for firefighters. So, we strongly encourage offensive language. You can't curse enough. So I'm probably going to let a few out. Yeah, there's definitely an
Perfect.
E on the thing. I'm holding it all back right now because I'm trying to be polite, but I have the
Oh,
mouth of a poorly trained sailor. So,
oh my God.
um,
I grew up in Maine, middle of nowhere. I was in
gotcha.
a trailer was my
Okay.
upbringing. So listen,
All
I've,
right. So
I've
I'm in good
heard and
company.
seen it all. Okay.
Perfect. Because the first thing I thought was like, we go to these fucking seminars and they
Yep.
drive me nuts. So here's
Yep.
the problem with a lot of us is we'll go to some of these classes, some of these seminars, and we'll take training, and like a bunch of our guys will read the book Why We Sleep,
Yeah.
and phenomenal book, so much information, but it should be one of the guys who is big into sleep that I talk with. He said that book should be listed under horror for first responders because
Yeah.
it's like he goes on to say like all of these things that we can't fix. And you're
I
like, okay,
know.
well then what do I do? So it becomes this
Yeah.
thing where people would rather ignore it than
Yep.
face it, because if you work a 9 to 5, there are more solutions for you. But the most common shift in America for firefighters is 24 hours on, 48 hours off.
Mm.
And then every 3 weeks, you get 5 days off in a row. Those 5 days might be where we can maybe reset a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like Dr. Walker mentions that the deficit, that the sleep debt that you start building up when you have poor sleep, it takes a fairly long time to correct it. And our 48 hours off, I don't think we're going to do it in those 2 days. So I don't want to try to tell these guys and girls out there like, hey, we can fix this in 2 days. I want to say like, what are we going to do for like, what's the most bang for the buck that we can be doing in our time off? We will go to work at 7 a.m. and we get off work at 7 a.m. the next day. So we come off work, we have maybe slept a couple hours or absolutely none. If I was a client of yours, like what's kind of the best bang for the buck to try to recover?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So a couple things. One, to your point there, it's such a kind of fine line of not having those fear tactics at the same time, how to prioritize and take and have reverence for sleep and really and see how can we set it up powerfully in our scheduling and how we're thinking about sleep, but without also getting ourselves freaked out, which can be really problematic because we know that there's such a psychological connection with sleep. And then the minute you try to force sleep, anyone that's tried that, like good luck. So how do we deal with that? Well, one, I would say another resource that can be helpful, because a this is something that does take that skill set, that learning of what's there, because it would be so nice if we could just say, oh, well, here's what you do X, Y, Z, and you're done. Turns out that there's so many factors that impact your circadian rhythm. Is really a lot of what we work on at Sleep as a Skill, is to strengthen our circadian rhythm, even in the face of like that 24-hour issue. So one resource that I would share would be one book that's fully devoted to shift work, which is called The Sleep Fix. And that was written by an ABC correspondent who would have very early morning shifts that she would be running, or sometimes just, have to be kind of like breaking news on demand, just, be called in weird hours or what have you. So the whole book is devoted to her really acting as a journalist and going in deep on what are those things that we can do for shift workers, because she would just hear, well, I guess you should quit your job, basically.
Same.
Right. But she loved her job. And so she wanted to figure out,
Right.
what can I do
Right.
to maintain this, but still have workable sleep and not be dependent on sleep aids and all these things. So, well, one, I would like to be a stand for how can we work to have it all for more, say, this is also a problem in the medical community, because we see these kind of unreasonable shifts that are just not working for our biology. So how can we kind of have some more disruption, or how can we make this more of a lifestyle? Because one of the biggest things that we see for shift workers is, can we keep this all on time? So meaning, one of the problems we see for shift workers is a lot where they'll have a difficult shift or a couple shifts, and then they'll try to go back to normal society, for that 5-day off stretch or what have you. And the problem is that if we can instead support schedules that would basically set people up so that this becomes their new reality, because everything with sleep, we want consistency as much as possible, even in the face of these, abrupt schedule changes. So we want to see, if we pan back, what is possible for us to have as much consistency within that, egregious, 24-hour shift. So that would be one of the things that we would be looking to see, is even if it would mean more of a nighttime lifestyle or whatever would work for that scheduling, then that's what we'd want to create. For example, with our poker players, a lot of them, we might kind of see what is the average kind of scheduling that we can find. And then we might actually set them up so that they're going to bed more routinely at, say, 2 a.m. And yet that's their
Really?
lifestyle as much as possible, because we know that consistency is way more important than trying to a couple days a week be like everyone else, and then these other nights have this huge offsetting, because we know that that's going to be what is as powerful as possible. And then we can also kind of relate to that 24-hour extreme is almost, a time where you're flying across, the globe. And so how would we prepare for that, like a flight or something of that nature? So those would be some of the things. So one, checking out that resource, because it's going to actually take, how can we create a lifestyle around this? One of the most challenging is definitely rotating shifts for sure, because that is just so
It's a
detrimental
moving
to,
target.
yeah, our biology just is not designed for that over the long term, maybe every so often. But for those people that are, on that sort of schedule for decades, there's no way around it that is damaging,
Yeah.
massively damaging to our biology or mental health. We know it sets us up for much higher rates of cancer, diabetes, certainly sleep and wake time disruptions. So what we want to do is aim to systemically see, can we minimize as much of those type of rotating shift work schedules, and then bring in a consistent regular schedule that we design a life around that. So now maybe you become more of a nighttime person, if that does help align, or whatever one we can create. That's what we want to aim to do, is 7 days a week as much as humanly possible. The other piece to this is that you want to discover what are those components of a strong circadian rhythm, so that you can bring those in. So if you're looking to mimic daytime in this schedule, then what would that look like? So for you, your daytime might be nighttime. And so we'd have to bring in full spectrum light, red light at those particular times. And then the other times, if you're living in an upside down reality where now your night is everyone else's day, then we want to do all the due diligence to shift over your environment so that it's pulling for those results as much as possible. And that's where the blue blockers come in, that are amber or red, not clear, for when you're looking to facilitate nighttime behaviors, which is
Yeah.
the developing of that melatonin at the right time. I know that's a very long answer and not as ideal as we might like, because it would take a little bit of looking at what our schedules are, and our ongoing kind of shifts that we have, and our responsibilities that
Yeah.
are happening throughout the rest of our week, to support that strong circadian rhythm as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, I that brought up a couple of questions. So, like for the setting yourself up for kind of the nighttime, or maybe you're more of a night person. One thing a lot of firefighters across America do is they have a second job, or they start a
Yeah.
business. Like, um, the reason we have a 24 on and 48 off schedule is because we're supposed to be using those 2 days to recover. And what happens really often is they're like, oh, look, there's 2 more days that I can work. So
Oh,
I wish I could
crazy.
change
I
this.
know.
But sometimes it's actually a necessity. A lot of firefighters around the country don't get paid that well. And, most of them have kids. So they kind of want to, provide for them a little bit more. And they'll work a second job, or they are plumbers, or they're tradesmen, or things like that. So it's kind of just a reality. But with that, let's say, I mean, a lot of them get off shift and maybe they got beat up all night, and they go and they work their plumbing job for 7 or 8 hours, or AC, air conditioning, down in South Florida, big deal. You're in Texas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you get it. So it's like a high demand thing, and a lot of guys do AC business or pool business. So there, would that be something where their daytime is still kind of like daytime? Like they get beat up all night and they still go work all day. Should they be changing maybe their sleep time at all? Or is this something where they're probably exhausted when they get home? I don't know if they have I don't know if they have trouble falling asleep at all, but maybe staying asleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, our biology still remains the same, where we still really largely require for healthy adults to somewhere in that range of 7 to 9 hours.
Mhm.
So that's where problems can emerge if we try to cheat biology and say, okay, well, I've done it before, I can do it again, and then cut out some of that reliable time where we need to also recover, because we do have that emerging sleep debt. And then there can be, as the US Army is calling it, a quote point of no return, as that's relating, part of the terminology there is around testosterone levels, particularly for men, because we see that there appears to be a point of no return, that after a time of, an ongoing weeks and months and years of getting insufficient sleep that eventually it appears that we're not able to get that those levels of testosterone back up again to those previous levels without having either restored sleep much earlier on, or eventually it just can't go back to where it was. And since we see such a crucial and critical level of low testosterone rates, and, just the stats look like Mount Everest
Yeah.
of problems there. One of the theories is the link up with poor sleep that's been happening as an epidemic. So whatever it takes, and it's not meaning to be another fear tactic, not trying to have that added
No, of
Matt
course. Yeah.
Walker-ism,
Yeah.
but just another way to prioritize that. Sometimes we might have to make those challenging choices. And I know it's like a really hard thing because there's so many people are struggling and need to have those multiple jobs and multiple income streams. But just as a foundation, making sure that we're working into that equation, that around 7 to 9 hours, or parsing that together in sometimes a less than ideal fashion, even in certain nap, as they call it in the US Army, tactical napping, that you're aiming to get as much of
I
that.
love that term.
Yeah,
That's
right. I
great.
know they're really great with the
Yeah.
phraseology. They've even got like caffeine dosing schedules that they're calling it, and all kinds of things
Huh.
to make that
Talk
work
about
well.
that
Now,
one in a second.
yeah, right. Exactly. I'm sure totally. When we're
Yeah.
struggling, we're pulling out all those resources. And just to circle back on another possible resource, I know you mentioned too some of the work that we're doing with just different organizations. Another organization that is a nonprofit that I alluded to is called 62romeo.org.
Yes.
And that
Heard of
one's
them.
for veterans and first responders, so that their whole aim is to help support, and going through the nitty gritty with you on what your particular schedule might be, and help support, okay, what do we need to do in that case? Because there are so many asterisks depending on what people have on their plate. So that would be a great one. Now, what they're using is called CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Now they're changing the verbiage a little bit to make it, I think they're calling it CBEI, so cognitive behavioral education for insomnia, because it's a whole legal thing to do therapy as a organization. So it's
Yeah.
education.
Yeah.
So these can be so powerful because they'll give lots of tools too on those times where you are likely to be struggling to be able to fall asleep, when it's a totally upside down time for your body that might not feel tired at certain points. And how can we navigate that even psychologically and, behaviorally?
I think you said something that's really important. And this is, well, actually, you said a lot of important things, but two of them really stuck out to me. The decrease in testosterone has become a
Mm,
huge problem with us in firefighters. And to the point where we get, at least in my department and most places in South Florida, we get physicals yearly. And guys and girls started checking their testosterone. And
yeah.
I was just talking to one of my good friends yesterday, and she's been a firefighter for as long as I have, about 15 years. Very, very busy fire department. And she gained like 60 pounds. Her testosterone proportionally was really, really low. She went on, she got promoted and she worked a desk job. She lost a ton of weight, and all her levels started coming back, but she was like early menopause already,
Mm,
which is crazy. So she's like in her 30s, late 30s, and she's coming up on hot flashes and like doing everything
yep.
already. So, and she said like a lot of females in that fire department are starting to have the same problem. So obviously this is like throwing a monkey wrench into the whole thing. But with the testosterone side of it, is there and I always throw the disclaimer out, like we're not doctors, we're not trying to give medical
Yeah.
advice, like none of this stuff, obviously, but in your experience, when you have a lot of these people, and from what you've read about the point of no return, pretty interesting. What does supplementing with testosterone or getting a prescription for testosterone do for sleep? Does that have a positive impact? Because if we are past that point of no return, and I know a lot of our firefighters, doctors, like, your test is so
Yeah.
low, there is no other way to do this. You have to go on testosterone. It's like you said, either quit your job, which they're not going to, or past the point of no return. What does that look like? Testosterone supplementation on sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we do see that low testosterone can absolutely inversely affect our results with our sleep in a negative way, unfortunately. And so as we do start to restore workability, like all things, the body loves homeostasis. And so looking to pull for that sufficient amount of testosterone. And there are, now this gets controversial because there are a lot of different theories on this, but we do see that there, and we certainly see this on the ground, because one of the things that we've built with Sleep as a Skill is every person we work with has Oura rings. So we have hundreds and hundreds of
Cool.
Oura rings, right? So we're able to see very nuanced of changes that happen with people's sleep when they add in different initiatives and different things. And often we do see some benefits as far as the wearable data is concerned, with things like testosterone, and hormone replacement therapies. Now, I'm not to say, 'cause, then there's a lot of other questions of what does this do over
Yeah.
the long term
Yeah.
and all
Yeah. Yeah.
kinds of things. So,
Of course.
not meaning to bring anything in either way, but we do see, however people get there, that improving testosterone levels certainly seem to have a positive effect on sleep, as long as we reach that Goldilocks, like all hormones, and not overshooting or undershooting. But definitely seem to make a difference there. Now, one call out is if people are starting to utilize testosterone replacement therapies, that there can be an uptick in sleep apnea as a result, is one thing that seems to occur sometimes when we're adding in testosterone, from a external source, is that oftentimes we can see an uptick in, if there was pre-existing sleep apnea, or even if there wasn't sleep apnea present, that we can suddenly start to see instances of that. So it's something to be on the lookout for if you are either replacing that testosterone or considering that I'm a stand that everyone in the future, that we're all being tested for sleep apnea, because it's 1 in 4 people are the numbers, but it's even speculated that it might be more than that. And certainly you called out for women as well. We see that as they start navigating through perimenopause, which can happen as early as, those mid to late 30s, which is surprising. Many women have no clue about that. But it's, so that can begin so early, that perimenopause, and that can last years and years. And as we navigate through those different hormonal changes, then women can become closer to men in their rates of instances of developing sleep apnea, even if they never had it before. They might have tested, years back and said, oh, I don't have sleep apnea, I'm good. But turns out they could develop that. And any of us, as we, maybe if we gain a little bit of weight, or it changes in elasticity in the
Yeah.
muscles
Yeah.
in
That's what I
our
was thinking.
tongue, right,
Hmm.
can fall back, changes in our nose, or if we have any sort of nasal issues there, many anatomical things can occur. And now we might be breathing, from mouth breathing, or having
Yeah.
difficulty throughout the course of the night. So that is, of course, one of the, you mentioned low hanging fruit, and of the many sleep disorders. So different sites put it to different numbers, anywhere from 80 to over 100 sleep disorders that exist, that we might be running around having no idea that we have. So if we're not first addressing those, that's problematic. And so once we address those, that can ensure that any of the sleep that we're getting is more quality sleep, and then we can go to work on the optimization of that sleep. But if you're someone that's running around with like moderate to severe sleep apnea and just don't even know, which many people don't know, or just, oh, I snore a little bit, no big deal. Turns out that can be really disruptive to our ability to get to those deeper sleep stages. And then it's all for naught, the amount of sleep that you're even able to scrape out, as a shift worker, that
Poor
you want to
quality.
make right. You want to make sure the quality is great. And that's going to so affect your T levels for sure.
Yeah. To underscore what you just said, this is huge in the fire service too. So like, there was a study that everybody always cites, but there was over 1,000 firefighters studied in this sleep study, and over 40% of them had a sleep disorder.
Yeah.
But the crazy part was, it was like 60 or 70% of those that had a sleep disorder had no idea they had it. And the biggest one was sleep apnea. So, and I know a lot of it does come from weight gain over time. Like your sleep quality goes bad, you have a hard time burning fat, when your sleep quality is poor, and then you gain weight, and then, all this other stuff. So with the other point besides the testosterone that I wanted to bring up that you had just mentioned before was the CBTI, and it reminded me of another thing from Dr. Walker's book where he talks about mental health.
Totally.
The other really big problem in the fire service right now, we lose as many or more firefighters to suicide every year as we do for line of duty deaths. So we have this huge problem that I believe is very multifaceted. I'm also very interested in that, and I study that too. But one of the big things is the lack of sleep. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how the lack of sleep affects your brain and what potential risks there are for mental health?
Oh, so good.
I know it's a long one, but
No, and it's such an important one.
yeah, it's very
Actually,
important for us.
we had a super fascinating podcast episode where we had the people that were behind this kind of this study that's gotten a lot of press, partly because they did a great job too with making it really practical, where they're calling it the mind after midnight. And what
Whoa.
this and I feel like this can be really, really helpful and practical for all of us, and particularly for shift workers. And then this topic of suicidality, because so the mind after midnight, what they discovered was that there seems to be this clear kind of diurnal pattern to our thoughts, which I think is so fascinating. Now, diurnal is just simply, as diurnal creatures, that's human beings. We're all diurnal creatures. So we're meant to be designed to be active by day and at rest at night. So that's already, we're already kind of an uphill battle if we are shift workers or working that 24-hour schedule. So it's important for us to at least know that during those times, it's kind of like a red flag time for us, because we're already doing something that our biology says we really shouldn't be doing. And so with that, we want to be extra careful or aware of what might we be up against during those periods. Now, the mind after midnight found that in your midnight, now that might be different for different shift workers, but it's not specifically midnight. It's like the late wee hours of the morning with whatever your schedule is. So say 2, 3, 4 in the morning for the average person. And for some people, it might be different. But those wee hours in the morning, what they found was this kind of flawed logic to our thinking. And we would merge into this more kind of depressive thinking pattern, anxious. And then we would see these rates of suicide go up in those kind of vulnerable hours. So what's the practical takeaway for this? One of the things that I have my clients think about with some of these results from this study and others like it, is that we want to start to almost have this like self contract with ourselves, that the thoughts that we might be dealing with right in those hours, almost just be it's almost akin to being drunk, or just not firing at all cylinders in the right way. And I don't know about anyone else, but I feel like so many of us can relate to, we're waking up at those 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and we're thinking of all the horrible things going on in our life and problems. And so we want to know that the way we're approaching and the way that our brain is firing is not in its logical thought pattern. So it's a vulnerable time for us. And that's why we want to actually throw up, more of those resources for people, and make sure that, the suicide hotlines and the ability to connect with others. So whether it's, kind of like phone a friend style, or ways that we can talk through these problems, are available from a mental health perspective. And then even aside from that, we know that mental health disruption comes about the more disrupted our sleep pattern is. So that's where it becomes so important, of whatever your schedule is, how we can make it as consistent as possible so it becomes a lifestyle is really part of our goal. Because from a mental health perspective, we want to be able to know, when do we largely wake up? When do we largely go to sleep? And if there's all kinds of question marks with that, that can be very concerning for our body and mind.
Yeah. So I would like to take this time, if any of my patients after midnight were talked to very rudely, it wasn't me, it was the diurnal sleep
Yes,
pattern. And I'm
exactly.
sorry.
That's so well said. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well,
It happens. So I was on this
yes.
truck. Anybody on I don't say what fire department I work for, but anybody on my fire department would laugh if they heard me say it's a really busy truck. It's called Rescue 2. And we're up most of the night, every night. And I that's when I started developing my sleep pattern problem when I was
Yeah.
working there. And I was fairly young in the fire department. I was like 3 or 4 years on. And I started waking up at home at about 3 o'clock in the morning, between 2:30 and 3 every day. And I would stay up for about an hour.
Yeah.
And on this truck, our average call length, I went through and I started looking at statistics because I got nerdy with it. But on this truck, our average call length was an hour. And percentage wise, like statistically, 90% of the month that, when they do the breakdown by month, 90% of the month calls come in at between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. So you had a 90% chance of running a call between those hours for about an hour. And I would be off shift and I
Wow.
would wake up between 2:30 and 3 for about an hour. So everybody that works on that truck, I have one of I have one of 3 reputations on the fire department. I love movie quotes, so I'm either movie quote guy.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
yeah, I'm the
Love
weed
it.
guy now because CBD. So like,
Yep.
that's just like
Totally.
the weed guy, or I'm the
Yeah.
sleep guy. So those are the
Amazing.
3 big conversations people call me out of the blue for.
Mm.
But the sleep thing, a lot of people on Rescue 2 will call me and they'll say,
Yeah.
I'm having trouble sleeping. I'm like, are you having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep? Like, what's the deal? And they go, well, I can fall asleep just fine, but I wake up around 3 o'clock in the morning and I
Mm.
stay up for an hour. And it's like everybody at that firehouse. It's really crazy. But so I want to try something. So I'm gonna tell you what I'll be the stereotypical firefighter. I'll tell you what I did. I want you to kind of point out some of the things that I could do better because
Yeah, please.
this is like I think I'm gonna speak for a huge majority of us. So stereotypical firefighter that kind of starts off in their 20s. A lot of us will eat a small breakfast or limited breakfast, if
Mm-hmm.
any breakfast at all, on days that we're working.
Yeah.
We will consume anywhere from 300 to 700 milligrams of caffeine all throughout the day, as late as
Yep.
4 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of us try to eat okay, but we eat kind of like garbage. And at the station, it's kind of like eat whenever. Very frequently, we eat after midnight. So a lot of poor quality calorie choices happen after midnight, like when we're just trying to eat because we're hungry.
Yep.
And then on days off, this may be good or bad, I don't know, but we will come home and some of us either fall asleep right away for maybe 3 or 4 hours, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
less, right when we get home. So around between like 7 and 11, we'll fall asleep. And then, during those days off, we try to work out. A lot of us are pretty good at working out. So we'll do like an hour of, moderate to heavy, like cardio and or weightlifting, a few times a week. But the caffeine intake, as soon as we wake up from a nap, we will still keep that caffeine intake. A lot of us drink a lot of energy drinks. What else is really common with us? I would say alcohol consumption is above average, if not extremely high. Some of us to a crutch.
Yeah.
So I know that one's like a given. That's like really bad. And then the big one is supplementation. So good or bad, I don't know, but a lot of people will supplement a lot of pre-workout. People start taking melatonin because they have a hard time like feeling tired at night.
Yep.
Around, like
Yeah. Surprise.
and then
Yeah.
it kind of goes into this other thing where they go back to work. And so that's kind of like that would be like a really basic rudimentary kind of schedule, if you will, of most firefighters, especially in their like 20s or 30s.
Okay. So good. So first off, I skew very tech leaning and like to gamify this as much as possible. So really one of the things that I would suggest people begin with is if they're not already tracking, to start tracking. Two of the types of sleep trackers that we probably work with the most are certainly Oura Ring, is the top for sleep. And yet we also do a lot of work with Whoop bands, and many people that we're working with are wearing both, because Whoop is actually really great for kind of the daytime readouts too, and from a more athleticism perspective. And so using those together can be great, but even just pick one, then
Cool.
just, we can get more data around what patterns are emerging, because often there's a lot of blind spots that might emerge, especially when we are dealing with more challenging schedules like this. So we can start to pan out and see like really what is going on. What are some of the average times that we're falling asleep, staying asleep, so we can devise and arrange what we call it at our company circadian crafted day. So we want to get
Hmm.
really clear on what most of the time is your day mode and night mode, which would be that diurnal pattern, because that will help fill in the gaps for us of what we should be doing and when. Um, and then we also look at things like chronopharmacology. So that's the fancy word for the timing. Chrono just is kind of timing, the timing of our drugs. And our drugs can be anything as, kind of banal or basic as caffeine, alcohol, THC, or prescription medications or supplements. And then is the timing of when we're choosing to have those serving us or not serving us. My husband says I should have a show called Mollie Ruins Everything, because because the bad news insight is that unfortunately many times for sleep it's more of a subtractive
Yeah.
nature versus an additive. And so definitely some of the things that we'd want to subtract from that low hanging fruit kind of terminology that you had started us off with, can be so powerful. That alcohol is like, ugh,
Yeah.
and the wearables will show it all with, particularly HRV. So I highly suggest that people are tracking HRV, especially for that, really
Heart rate
important.
variability.
Yes, heart rate
Yeah.
variability. Thank you. Heart rate variability, which is why I say that, is that that's one of our better metrics that we can point to that gives some semblance of an understanding of how our nervous system is responding. And that can also, kind of trickle out to elements of our psychological kind of response to the world around us as well. So if we are trending towards anxiety, depression, and of course, then sadly, the things that we're dealing with around suicide rates, then often we can get some signs with HRV in advance. So, because many of us are just notoriously as human beings not the best at knowing when we're going into that direction. So this can act as a kind of check and balance.
Hmm.
And so certainly alcohol will almost always show up in our HRV responses, as well as if we're getting sick, which we're really, if we are dealing with that variable schedule, our immune response can be more vulnerable. So we might be dealing with sickness, and then paired with some of the, deleterious effects of those variable schedules, we can spot some of that. So we can make changes. Now, the other piece of tech that I would like to add in for people with all this is a continuous glucose monitor. And even you don't have to at all be dealing with diabetes to just have these. That's part of why some of these companies are blowing up, like Levels Health, Signos,
Yeah.
NutriSense, Very, Tastermonial. All of these are providing ways for just the average population to wear a continuous glucose monitor. The reason I say that is because what we're talking about of just kind of this on the go type, maybe stressful environment or whatever happens, that we might be not making the best food choices. It's not just for like, oh, wouldn't that be nice? It's for really just the results with the most annoying one is the middle of the night wake ups. And one of the more common reason that I see people having those middle of the night wake ups is from blood sugar instability. And so if you're dealing with that all throughout the course of the day, which most people are,
Hmm.
because, we have, recent studies out of American centric studies that show on average on 88% of Americans having metabolic dysfunction, meaning that they're just, there's a whole roller coaster of their blood sugar up and down all throughout the course of the night or day. And if it's doing that by day, you can almost guarantee that it's going to be happening in the night while you're
Yeah.
sleeping. And
Yeah.
what is the problem with that? That is specifically the type of wake ups that you wake up around 3 a.m. and now you're up for a stretch of time because of that stress response. Because anytime that blood sugar tanks like that, then it sends this series of stress kind of chemicals signals, if you will, for the body. And now you're up because it's feeling like something is fundamentally wrong. And so that's when it's not like that quick type of wake up where you just go to the bathroom, go back to sleep. It's more of like, we need to fix this problem. So now we're awake for an extended period of time. So one, balancing of that blood sugar is going to be super important. The other important thing is that with blood sugar, we can also track what's happening with all that caffeine that you're pointing to too.
Yeah.
Because for many people, they can start to see spikes with the caffeine on your continuous glucose monitor. Now, and it's not for everyone. That's why it's important to test for yourself, is bio-individuality. And so we want to see, is this stressing you more? The other really crucial thing is if you are dealing with massive stress, then you can almost always count on that there's going to be some sort of change in your glucose during that period of time. Which is really, you go on, you get a call and it's something really scary or something that you're dealing with, and stressful or what have you. You can look back and you can see that your glucose was going up measurably, and now you're going to be dropping thereafter. So it provides another real world way, instead of saying like, oh, I know I should eat better. Or also alcohol will often disrupt how that's playing out too. So it's a great way to have a bit more of a thing to point to instead of a series of shoulds, because usually shoulds aren't great for behavioral change. And then also I would say for those that might go into the THC side of things, similar to alcohol, we see in many studies that it might be helpful for sleep onset for many, just like it is with alcohol, but then both seem to be kind of fall apart a bit more later. Now, CBD being distinct from that, as well as CBN. So those two seem to be more promising in our studies of sleep quality, whereas it's the THC part that might get a little more funky for sleep quality. So what you're speaking to of the importance of how can we extract those things that can give us benefit, massive benefit for many people, for anti-inflammatory response and helpful for mental health and anxiety, but then kind of maybe being mindful that it, particularly for some people, that added THC part might be a little bit more disruptive to sleep quality.
Yeah, very unpopular opinion.
Yeah,
I
totally.
I'm a proponent of medical marijuana, and I think that it definitely has its indications. It is an extremely powerful thing for a lot of people, but with sleep, I'm well aware of the studies, and I've tried to mention that and be like, hey, I'm not, anti THC or marijuana or anything. I'm not anti-alcohol either. I drink alcohol, but I'm really, really cognizant of limiting it. And I'm actually a big fan of drinking, like day drinking rather than night drinking, because I know what happens. I was like, just get it out of the way earlier. The hard part is if you tell my guys and girls that, they're like, cool. So we'll day drink, and then I'll take a nap, and then we can go out at night, and then we can drink some. And you're like, no. The whole point was to like do the cutoff.
Yeah,
I know.
exactly.
That's the hard part. The last couple of things I wanted to mention, I could get a whole lot. We have some audience questions. Ice baths, any effect on sleep, and what do you think about them?
Beneficial in many regards for sleep, beneficial for testosterone. We just did a great episode on the ability to naturally improve testosterone levels through cold therapy. Asterisks to all this: one, ideally putting it more during the day because of the paradoxical warming effect thereafter. So take advantage of that, but not putting it too late. Other asterisk would be if you're dealing with lots of acute stressors, or for women, sometimes of menstruating age, it can act as another stressor akin, but it's positive stressor. But just if we're dealing with too many stressors at one period of time, or sometimes during parts of their cycle, it might make sense to put those, they'll want to look into cycle syncing. And that's a whole kind of approach, that there's certain times of your cycle where you might put those. So like all things, it's kind of a dose dependent response, but largely can be so beneficial.
Diet, ketogenic and or intermittent fasting combo, does that have any effect on sleep?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Big topic. One, I would
some
say
light conversation right for the end.
Yeah, exactly. Something looking into circadian rhythm intermittent fasting, a long series of words that basically mean that you're aiming to eat within sunrise and sunset. Now, of
Yeah, I've
course,
heard
this
you
can
mention
be,
this. Yeah.
yeah, and that one's really interesting because we find that it seems to be disruptive to our ability to produce sufficient melatonin when we're eating when it's dark out,
Hmm.
essentially. However, I know that, of course, that can be disruptive if we are dealing with shift working and variable schedules. So, whatever your day mode and night mode is that you're looking to eat within your day mode, ideally, and do more kind of gentle fasting. It's not even really fasting, it's more meant to like give your digestion a bit of a break
Yeah.
so that you're not having to digest while you're sleeping. And
Yeah.
that's really the problem there.
That's the problem. Like, not the fact that you're getting the calories per se. It's really just that your gut has to digest while you're supposed to be in REM or not in REM,
Yeah,
whatever, in sleep.
exactly. And right. And then in the hours before sleep, if because melatonin is really a preparatory hormone, so
Mhm.
it's preparing you for sleep. And if it's being disruptive, that can affect your ability to both fall asleep with ease, stay asleep. So there can be, some problems there. And then with keto, I would say from a mental health perspective, I would encourage people to check out really fascinating book called Brain Energy from Dr. Chris Palmer. He is out of Harvard and just really shaking up the psychiatry side of things. So what he's rebranding psychiatry to be metabolic psychiatry and or mitochondrial psychiatry, and using keto predominantly as the modality, so really medical ketosis, and
Yeah.
finding that we do that. We know that there is validity to doing that for seizures, but could there be benefits from a mental health, a lowering brain inflammation by getting into
Wow.
ketosic, going into ketosis more routinely? Some people look to seeing, oh, could I use external, so ketone esters? So that's something you could explore too. Much longer topic for sure, but
Sure.
I would say check out that book. Or he's on a ton of podcasts too, Huberman, Tim Ferriss, all the things. So check him out.
Dr. Palmer. So
Yep.
when we for everybody listening, you can check the show notes. We're gonna put all this stuff. I've been taking notes, but Kim edits all this stuff up and she's gonna have all this in there. So all the things that you were recommending for resources and some books and stuff, we'll just like put links in there for everything. Um Again, I could ask a million more questions. I don't want to take too much time. And last thing I want to finish with is, what are you excited about, or what is like something super positive that we are seeing in either your world or like the science world with sleep?
Mm. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad we just happened to talk on the Chris Palmer piece, because the mental health correlation with sleep is a really big passion point for me. I have family members that are dealing with major mental health issues, schizophrenia, bipolar, some real things in my family. So this is a big passion item for me, and we know that every single item within the DSM of any sort of mental health is correlated with disrupted sleep.
Yeah.
So it is crucial that we're prioritizing this to manage mental health and ensure in the bi-directional relationship that appears to be within those two things. So the fact that we're starting to see that, oh my goodness, there's this link up between nutrition, like you just mentioned, the management of our sleep, our circadian health, and how this can impact both our ability to have workable, kind of minimizing and sometimes even into remission for symptoms of really extreme mental health concerns, is such a big deal. And all of this is looking at, could a lot of this be mitochondrial based in nature? So it gives us something to hold on to, of what can we do to support our mitochondrial health. And this is I know I'm opening up a can of worms because this is a much bigger topic for sleep, but turns out that in order to get great sleep, we need energy, because it actually is really an energetic standpoint. It's a metabolically taxing activity to sleep, because there's
Hmm.
all kinds of activity, even though we might think we're just doing nothing. We're doing all kinds of things while we're sleeping, and the brain, especially going into REM, can have like a firework of activity. And if we don't have sufficient reserves of energy, this can be a big problem. So a lot of the things that we're doing at Sleep as a Skill is around how can we support having that improved ATP production and mitochondrial health. And so all of those things seem to work in tandem with our results with anxiety, depression, and things that so many of us are dealing with and acting as if, well, I guess it's just, me. And it turns out that maybe that's maybe a flawed logic. And I think the fact that now even really big institutions like Harvard that are actually bringing in whole domains of metabolic and mitochondrial psychiatry is really, really important, because sleep is so fundamental in regards to that. So that's one thing that's really exciting for me. I think it provides, instead of just like this kind of old school track where, well, we're going to try you on all these different types of pharmaceuticals, and not to, knock these things, but that
No,
maybe
of
there's a
course.
whole right world that we were missing. So that's a really exciting period. And then lastly, I would say, previously for sleep, so many of the past would be two things: CBTI and a sleep study. And then if you do those two things and you're not getting your results, oh, sorry, bye. So that's how it,
Medication.
yeah, exactly. And it turns out that now there's so many other things that we can do. And that also includes some of the things that we deal with, which is that circadian rhythm entrainment. And by strengthening that circadian rhythm, by measures of what time you're eating, what time you're moving your body, what time, and the types of thoughts you're having at what time of hour, the drugs that you're taking, the light dark cycles that you're exposed to, and more, can be playing such a role in your sleep results. So I think we're going to see more of that in the future.
It is super exciting. I think there is a lot of there's more awareness of it right now, and so people are kind of flocking to it. So bad part is we've had what seems like, and I'm sure it is, an epidemic of sleep issues in modern times. The good thing is because that happened, people want to know why. So I think like a lot of the answers are, starting to, there's a lot more brain power getting added to it, which is really cool. Mollie, thank you so much. If firefighters or first responders want to find you online and either utilize like your coaching or products, or just find you and see all the information you have out there, where's the best place to go?
Sure. At sleepasaskill.com. And that's where you can take a free sleep assessment. You'll get tailored responses, right back to your inbox around what you're dealing with your sleep. We also have a weekly sleep newsletter called Sleep Obsessions, where we put all kinds of late breaking information around sleep in there. We have our weekly sleep podcast. So we can get lots of, free information your way. And then if you're looking for further support, then we have online cohorts and one-on-one offerings, and something that we've been adding on that's been getting great responses called sleep wearable audits. So if you have any sort of sleep wearable, particularly Aura and Whoop bands, then we'll audit your stats and give you practical things that you can do to make a difference with those.
Yeah, I would love to talk to you about that. Like maybe get a cohort from a specific fire department, especially with people like from specific firehouses. This way,
yeah,
it's really a very set type of schedule. The people that run similar calls and things like that. That would probably be really cool. From the science side too. My other the other side of my brain that wants all the data. So
yeah,
very cool.
totally.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Amazing.
This has been awesome. Yeah, we'll have this show up, and I'm really looking forward to all the feedback. It's been really helpful. I know this is a really hard thing to address, and it's very difficult for firefighters to wrap their head around the fact that it can be addressed, successfully, and there are options out there. So this will come across as really refreshingly useful. I know a lot of people are going to be able to get a lot of use out of it. So you're helping us. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for the
Yeah,
work
of
that you're
course.
doing. So appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.